You wake up. You feel the warmth of the blanket. You smell coffee somewhere in the apartment. You feel slightly happy, slightly sad, slightly hungry. You know you are awake. You know you are alive. You do not have to ask. The world has a texture from the inside, and you are the one feeling it. There are roughly 8 million animal species on this planet. For most of human history, we assumed that only one of them experienced any of this. Only one had an inside. Only one was actually somebody. But for 99% of scientific history, this didn't exist. No way to test what an animal feels. No way to measure subjective experience. No proof that anything outside a human skull was really there. For 200,000 years, we lived on a planet full of creatures we had decided were empty. So do animals know they are alive? Do they feel anything when their heart beats? Or are they elaborate biological machines, performing life with nobody home? The answer is stranger, more recent, and more disturbing than most people imagine. Let's start with the question that broke modern philosophy. In October of 1974, the American philosopher Thomas Nagel published a 16-page essay in the journal The Philosophical Review. He titled it, "What is it like to be a bat?" The argument was disarmingly simple. Even if we mapped every neuron in a bat's brain, every echolocation pulse it sent, every chemical signal it processed, we would still not know what it actually felt like to be one. To fly in the dark, to see the world through reflected sound, to hang upside down inside a cave. We could describe the bat completely from the outside, and still have no idea whether the bat had an inside. Nagel was not asking whether the bat was alive. He was asking whether there was anyone in there at all. His phrase became the most precise definition of consciousness in the history of philosophy. An organism is conscious, Nagel wrote, if there is something it is like to be that organism. There is, in other words, somebody home. The blanket on your skin this morning, the smell of coffee in the kitchen, the slight ache in your shoulder, all of that is what it is like to be you right now. Multiply that by 8 million species, and the question is no longer trivial. Nagel never claimed to know how to test this in animals. He just made the question impossible to dismiss. And the science that followed has slowly, year after year, been answering it. Let's start with the part of the answer that hurts the most. Fish. For decades, we told ourselves that fish were too primitive to feel anything. They had no real brain, no cortex, no inner life. We hooked them, we boiled them, we lined them up in coolers, and we did not lose a single night of sleep over it. Then, in 2002, the British biologist Lynn Snedden at the University of Liverpool published a study that quietly changed the field. She had examined the heads of rainbow trout and found something nobody had looked for: nociceptors. The specialized nerve endings that detect pain in mammals were present in the fish, in almost the same structure as in us. Worse, when Snedden measured them, the mechanical and thermal thresholds of fish nociceptors were lower than those of mammals. Fish do not just feel pain. They probably feel it sooner than we do. Then Snedden went further. She injected a small dose of bee venom or acetic acid into the lips of trout. The fish began rocking from side to side. They rubbed their lips against the gravel. They stopped eating. When given morphine, all of these behaviors went away. A fish's pain behavior responds to painkillers the same way ours does. The fish on your line is not a reflex machine. It is somebody being hurt. Every year, humans pull roughly 1 trillion fish out of the world's oceans. Until very recently, we had no scientific reason to believe any of them noticed. So, if fish feel pain, what about something even simpler? In October of 2022, a team led by the Finnish biologist Samadi Galpajaja-Lukola at Queen Mary University of London published a study in the journal Animal Behavior that stunned the field of insect cognition. Lukola placed 45 bumblebees inside an arena with 2 paths to a feeding area. One path was direct. The other required the bee to make a detour through a section filled with small wooden balls. There was no reward for rolling the balls, there was no training, there was no food, and yet the bees, again and again, abandoned the direct path and went out of their way to roll the wooden balls. Individual bees rolled balls between 1 and 117 times in a single session. Younger bees rolled more than older bees. Male bees rolled them longer than females. The pattern was almost identical to play behavior in puppies, kittens, and human children. For the first time in the history of science, an insect had been caught playing, And play in every species ever studied is one of the cleanest markers of subjective experience. You do not play if you do not feel. Somewhere inside the small body of a bumblebee, between the wings and the stinger, something likes the wooden ball more than the shortcut. That preference is the simplest possible signature of being alive on the inside. The science of feeling kept pushing outward, and in 2022, the law caught up. On April 7th of that year, the United Kingdom passed the Animal Welfare Sentience Act. For the first time in the history of Anglo-Saxon law, the statute recognized sentience, the capacity to actually feel, not only in vertebrates, but in two groups that had never been included before: decapod crustaceans, the lobsters, crabs and shrimp, and cephalopod mollusks, the octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish. The change was based on a report led by the philosopher Jonathan Birch at the London School of Economics. Birch and his team reviewed more than 300 existing scientific studies on these animals. Their conclusion was unambiguous. There is very strong evidence of sentience in octopuses, strong evidence of sentience in crabs, substantial evidence in lobsters. The lobster you boil alive at a restaurant is a creature with a working pain system. The octopus in the tank is somebody. After centuries of being treated as moving objects, these animals were finally written into law as beings. The crab on your plate is now, in British law, a someone. Then, 2 years later, the science delivered the largest statement it has ever made on this question. On April 19th of 2024, at New York University, 40 leading scientists, philosophers, and legal scholars signed a document called the New York Declaration on Animal Consciousness. The three principal authors were Jeff Sebo of NYU, Kristen Andrews of York University in Toronto, and Jonathan Birch of the London School of Economics, the same researcher behind the British law. The declaration said two things, very carefully. First, that there is now extremely strong scientific evidence that all mammals and all birds are conscious. There is no longer any reasonable scientific argument against it. Second, and far more shocking, that there is a convincing possibility that fish, reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates, including octopuses, crabs, and insects, are also conscious. In other words, the species that had spent 2,000 years of human philosophy classified as empty machines have now been reclassified by the scientists who study them most closely as probable subjects. The line we drew between the conscious and the unconscious turned out to be drawn in the wrong place. In 12 years, between the Cambridge Declaration in 2012 and the New York Declaration in 2024, the list of animals we have to take seriously has nearly doubled. So where does it actually end? The honest answer is that we still do not know. Plants almost certainly do not feel anything, in the strict sense of the word. They respond to light. They communicate through chemicals, but they have no central nervous system. No nociceptors, no neurons firing in the patterns that produce subjective experience. Bacteria? Probably the same. But somewhere between the bacterium and the octopus, between the tree and the bee, a light flickers on. Somebody starts to be there. We have not yet found the exact threshold, and the more carefully we look, the further down the chain that threshold seems to move. The frontier of consciousness in the science of the last 20 years has been moving in only one direction, outward, toward more species, toward more bodies, toward more minds. Every decade, we have to add more species to the list of who is allowed to be here. Every decade, the membrane around conscious turns out to be a little more permeable than we thought. For 200,000 years, we walked across a planet full of beings we had told ourselves were not really there. We hooked them, we boiled them, we caged them, we ate them with a clean conscience. The science of the last 50 years has dismantled almost every reason we ever had for that confidence. The dog at your feet feels pain. The fish on the hook feels it. The crab in the pot feels it. The bee on your window feels it. The octopus in the aquarium feels it. They do not know they are alive in the way you know it, with words and self-portraits and Sunday afternoons. They know it in a much older way. They feel what is happening to them. They want some of it to continue. They want some of it to stop. The question was never whether they were alive. The question was always whether we would notice them in time. 40 scientists signed a document in April of 2024 saying we were running out of excuses. The dog at your feet has known the whole time. So has the bee on your window. So has the fish in the bowl. The only species in this room that has been confused about whether anyone else is awake is the one reading these words. And every other animal on Earth has been quietly waiting for us to catch up. The bat in the cave, the trout in the stream, the bee on the petal, the octopus on the seafloor. They all know they are alive. They have always known. We are the only species that ever